Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.
Hello, everyone. It's debate week on AETN, the Arkansas Educational Television Network, and we resume this hour with a race for Attorney General. Our nominees are here, and in alphabetical order: Carrie Hicks, the Libertarian Party candidate; Mike Lee, the Democratic nominee; and Leslie Rutledge, the incumbent and Republican Party candidate. Our candidates, the nominees, will be questioned tonight by a panel of Arkansas journalists: Steve Bronner, an independent reporter; Janelle Lilly of KATV; and Byron Tate of the Sheridan Headlight, also a professor of journalism at UAPB. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. Rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of opening statements, questioning, rebuttals, and closing statements, all determined prior to the broadcast by a drawing in which the candidates or their representative participated. And our timekeeper this hour is Fred Wedor of AETN. And with that, our first opening statement tonight, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here in the audience, and thank you to the viewers at home. My name is Mike Lee, and I am running to be the people's lawyer. I will fight corruption, tackle the opioid epidemic that we have, and stop scammers and online predators. The people of Arkansas know, all Arkansans know, that this election, this race for Attorney General, is a chance to send a signal to lawmakers and lobbyists that this new era of corruption has come to an end. I will be the watchdog for the people of Arkansas at the state capitol. You can trust my integrity. Ask my high school sweetheart, Suzanne. We have 2 children, 9 grandchildren. I've worked my whole life to protect my family and to protect families across the state of Arkansas. A joy in my working career was working for the Consumer Product Safety Commission. I kept dangerous children's products made in China out of this country. We have some immense challenges in this state right now, such as the opioid crisis. Arkansas will not be successful with just average leadership. And we have an Attorney General who could not even be hired by the state due to a gross misconduct mark on her record. We can do better. We basically have looked at, we can do better than that, and we will take on the opioid industry, and I'll issue this challenge to General Rutledge that she needs to explain why she has basically taken money from the opioid industry, which is poisoning the state of Arkansas. My name is Mike Lee, and I am running to be the people's lawyer. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, thank you. Mr. Hicks.
I'm Carrie Hicks. I'm the Libertarian in the race. I'm the only person up here who is not a licensed attorney at law. I've received no funding from any special interest. I'm not a member of the Democratic or Republican Party that has made the mess that we are now encountering in this state. I will agree that there is an opioid crisis. However, shaking down pharmaceutical companies, and that's what it is not going to solve the opioid crisis. Politicians need to stay out of the medical, whatever is going on between a person and their doctor. That needs to be decisions made between the person and the doctor. We need relief from too many people taking too many pain pills, but the situation we have now is there are people who are hurting, who can't get the medicine that they need for their pain. One example is the marijuana amendment that was passed 2 years ago. It's something that the people wanted, but the politicians didn't. So here we are 2 years later. It hasn't been implemented. It's not likely to be implemented. I don't believe that it's the role of the Attorney General to stop laws proposed by the people. It's the role of the Attorney General to approve ballot titles and to defend those laws once they're made, to stand up and to do something about the laws to make sure they're implemented.
Mr. Hicks, thank you. Ms. Rutledge.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you to AETN, UCA for hosting today's debate, and I appreciate Mike and Carrie for joining me on stage. In 2014, Arkansans elected me as the first woman and the first Republican Attorney General of Arkansas. Since then, I've gotten married and I have a 10-week-old daughter at home. So now I describe myself as a Christian, pro-life, gun-carrying conservative mama. Friends, I love Arkansas. I love our way of life. I'm a 7th-generation Arkansan. I grew up on a cattle farm. I'm married to a row crop farmer. We are a farm family. Each year, as I've traveled all 75 counties meeting with Arkansans, I'm also reminded that Arkansas is just one big small town. We know the value of hard work and the importance of working together. That's why, as your Attorney General, I've made it a priority to always defend our families, faith, and freedoms, pushing back against criminals, con artists, and an overreaching federal government. I've gone after internet child predators and corrupt public officials. I've held bad businesses accountable, whether it's those con artists making those pesky phone calls, the car dealer who doesn't follow the law, or the opioid manufacturers who've created this deadly epidemic. I've also assisted our job creators in the state by eliminating overreaching federal regulations. With our record low unemployment rate, economic growth in our state, I am proud to say that Arkansas is now closed for overregulation and open for business. Friends, just look at my record. I want to keep fighting for you, and I can assure you that no one will outwork me for you as your Attorney General. I ask for your vote. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. God bless you, and I look forward to today's questions.
Ms. Rutledge is thanked. Our first question tonight comes from Steve Bronner, and it goes first to Mr. Hicks.
5 former legislators have been convicted of corruption-related charges. Another one has been indicted, and the 7th has been charged with not paying state taxes since 2003 and is still in office. The Attorney General's office is working with the FBI in this investigation. How proactive should the Attorney General's office be in addressing corruption in state government, and what else should it do?
It should be very proactive. It shouldn't wait for the FBI to take the lead. There needs to be a division that is both funded and staffed that addresses the issues of government corruption. There's more than one kind of corruption. You have the type of corruption where people are stealing money from the state. A lot of the legislature not policing itself. But there's another kind of corruption that's legal, and that legal corruption erodes our Constitution. Laws piled on top of laws. We have a district court system that there is no right to a jury trial in. District court judges are paid $123,000 a year, and the only way that you get a jury trial is to be found guilty in district court. Our public defender system does nothing but take defendants before the court and throws them to the wolves. We've got a lot of legal corruption that needs to be addressed too. but I would be very proactive. I would have a number of investigators working on it, and I would work with the legislature that they need to call for the resignation of people who are under investigation for any offense. If there's any evidence at all that suggests that that person is guilty, they should at least call for their resignation. I certainly would. I would be very proactive in addressing new laws that are brought before the people that erode the Constitution. I think a lot of the Constitution is being covered up with law.
Mr. Hicks, thank you. Ms. Rutledge, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Steve. Public corruption has been rampant, unfortunately, in Arkansas. And it's important that we remind Arkansans that no one is above the law, whether they are a public official or otherwise. Recently, I created a public integrity division at the Attorney General's office to investigate and combat public corruption. But even before then, I've been working with the FBI, the state police, and others to investigate those individuals who have taken advantage of Arkansans. Again, whether it's a legislator or a citizen, we must go after corruption in our states. We are currently investigating former legislators and legislators as part of our Medicaid fraud investigation involving referred family health care. We will continue to investigate those individuals and hold them accountable. Likewise, those legislators who have violated, broken the law, I have called for resignation. Came out of the gate early on to call for the resignation of individuals. If you do not follow the law, you should not be serving in the capacity of the public and violating the public trust. I will always put the public ahead of those individuals.
Ms. Rutledge, thank you. Mr. Lee, 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Yes, we have a swamp of our own in Arkansas that rivals the swamp that we have in Washington, D.C. 6 current and former legislators indicted by the federal authorities. One is serving 18 years in prison. And this particular person happens to be the one who wrote our current ethics law. Personal integrity is a timeless trait that we're missing in our state government and in our national government. Personal integrity. And I learned personal integrity at the U.S. Naval Academy when I was there, and I learned to live the honor code. You should not lie, cheat, or steal. Very simply. That covers almost every situation faced by any legislator or any person. Personal integrity is lacking. And you have my pledge that I will root out the corruption. I will be the watchdog at the state capitol for the people of Arkansas. And I have a plan also. I will be proactive in this particular situation, very proactive, because I have a plan, a proposal, an ethics law proposal for next January for the legislature. And basically the plan will give some teeth to the Arkansas Ethics Commission, keep lawmakers from turning instantly into lobbyists, and shine some light on the process by requiring them to report to a public database. And it will ban gifts like all expense paid trips that my opponent has been known to take in the past. So yes, I will be proactive on this particular issue. I have a pledge to you to root out corruption and a plan to address corruption.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Hicks, you have 1 minute for rebuttal, sir.
I think it's commendable that he has an ethics package that he would like to pass. I'm not that much in favor of giving the Ethics Commission more authority. As a libertarian, I believe the less authority that the government has, the better. I advocate individual rights. People know when they're doing wrong, and the people who are around them know that they're doing wrong. There's a thin blue line in the legislature where there are numerous legislators who are going to stand up for their party or for their friends, and they know that they're involved in corruption. So I have no problem with an ethics law, but I think we need ethical leadership instead of some law telling you you have to be ethical. You should know that already.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Lilly has the next question. It goes first to General Rutledge.
This is a two-part question regarding initiated measures. The law requires that the AG approve the language for a ballot title. And of course, this is supposed to be one of the few ways that the citizens of our state can directly have a say in the laws that govern them. Often, however, those titles are rejected over and over again, and even after approval, they often face scrutiny and legal challenges. So what changes, if any, would you make to office policy or like to be seen made by lawmakers? And the second part of that question is, considering that tort reform is the only measure off the ballot currently, should legislative referred measures undergo that same scrutiny?
Well, thank you, Janelle, for that question. And one of the roles of the Attorney General is to review ballot titles. And in that role, I look not to whether or not I would agree with a ballot title and support it or work against it. It's whether or not the language is clear. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, the Arkansas Supreme Court has muddied the water as to what is clear in a ballot title. If you all will remember, in 2016, after I had approved language for initiated acts to go on the ballot, the Supreme Court struck those measures down, muddying the water even more. I believe that Arkansans deserve a clear, fair process to get measures on the ballot. It is unfair for these individuals who have worked so hard to put the time, resources, and efforts into collecting signatures, pushing forward their message, only at the 11th hour here in October, as we stand now, for the Supreme Court to strike that down. We must have a clear, fair process. That is what I have stated time and again. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court muddied the water and really raised the bar as to what would be considered clear for Arkansans. As to the second part of your question, Janelle, on tort reform and whether or not legislative measures should be under that same review, I believe that we should set up a process, and I've already started working with legislators to make sure that we address this in the upcoming 2019 session to ensure that Arkansans have a clear, fair process to get on the ballot, but also to make sure that we have a clear, fair process for the legislative measures as well.
Mr. Lee, 2 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. Yes, the ballot initiative title referred to here with regard to General Rutledge, she turned 70 in a row down over a period of 2 years. 70. Unprecedented. That had never happened before. The most egregious one was the ballot title concerning minimum wage. And basically, we already had one of those for an example of what's clear and goes to the people. And that particular ballot initiative from 2014 was clear and passed by a great majority of the Arkansas voters. The proponents this year took the same basic structure, changed just dates and amounts, and submitted it to General Rutledge, and she turned it down, and she turned it down again. And the Supreme Court of Arkansas finally looked at it, and they told General Rutledge, pass this particular ballot initiative or write it yourself. Now that's a big slam. That is a body slam for an Attorney General. Basically, it should be a clear and even process. It shouldn't be a big deal. We've had this on our Constitution since 1922. Never have we had a problem like 70 in a row, 2 years, where some Attorney General just blocked every single thing until told by the Supreme Court to do otherwise. With regard to the legislative referrals, yeah, they probably do need to be looked at, but one of the things that we did not have, or the problem with those, is General Rutledge did not have to review those, so just the legislature put them on, and we know what kind of a problem we have with the state legislature.
Mr. Hicks, 2 minutes.
Well, with as many ballot titles that have been denied in the past couple of years, it makes one wonder what you have to say. I know that it's not the role of the Attorney General to just predict what the state Supreme Court is going to say. The Attorney General should look at the ballot measure and assume that the people are fairly intelligent, that they're not stupid, that they know what the ballot consists of. Too many times, an unpopular title has been rejected. One such occasion is with medical marijuana. Kept it off the ballot for a long time. Finally, it made the ballot. People voted on it, people won, but the politicians didn't want it. They call themselves advocating family values, but what they're doing is they're refusing to implement something that people with a constitutional right to pass a law passed. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. It doesn't matter if you are in favor of marijuana legalization or not. You had your chance to vote on it. The majority of people voted on it. There are laws that the legislature refers to the people that are very misleading. Does anybody know what an amendment to revise the judicial article means? Nobody really does, but if you voted for it, then what you voted for is the rewriting of the judicial article of the state constitution, a whole rearrangement of the court system. Did away with jury trials in district courts. So I would definitely look at ballot titles from the legislature and advise the people if I think that those ballot titles are misleading.
Rebuttal, Ms. Rutledge, 1 minute.
Thank you. Again, it's the role of the Attorney General, and what I've done over the last 3.5 years is reviewing ballot titles to make sure that when they do go before voters, that they are clear, that voters understand what you're voting on. How many times have you been to the ballot box and you see that big, long ballot title and think, what in the world does this mean? Well, it's the role of the Attorney General to make sure it's clear and that it's easy to understand. So in that role over the last couple of years, the Supreme Court raised the bar. As I said, in 2016, they muddied the water as to what is not clear. Going by that standard, I review the ballot titles. A vast majority of those rejected are not clear at all, are completely, sadly, very incoherent. And I believe that if you want to change the Arkansas Constitution, it needs to be clear for voters to understand it, that we don't need just extra verbiage in the Arkansas Constitution. We don't need to muddy our rights and those amendments in the Arkansas Constitution. I will always protect the Arkansas Constitution and the U.S. Constitution as your Attorney General.
Byron Tate has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Lee.
The campus carry law allows students to carry a gun onto a college campus and into a college classroom. If a teacher detects that a student has a gun, he may not ask that person if they have a concealed carry license or a concealed carry endorsement. Additionally, campus police do not know and cannot ask without reason if that person has the proper permits to have a gun on campus. Colleges and universities across Arkansas did not want this, but now that it's been forced on them. My question is, would you support legislation that would require those bringing guns onto college campuses to at least register with the campus's security officials?
All right. First of all, let me start off by saying I would not favor anything that would infringe anybody's Second Amendment rights necessarily. I'm all for the Bill of Rights, all 10 amendments, especially including the Second Amendment. As far as college campus carry, the legislation, we've got to look at what law enforcement thinks about that. We have to look at the law enforcement at the college and what requirements are there or what they think about this. As far as looking at the situation where you have requirements to register the guns or to at least make it aware, the people aware, the administration aware that you have the gun, then yes, I mean, that would be something that could be supportable. It seems reasonable and something that I think the Attorney General could look at.
Mr. Hicks, 2 minutes.
Well, I'm a strong advocate of the Second Amendment, and I don't see anywhere in the Second Amendment where it says we have the right to infringe upon it. I think people who want to carry guns are going to carry guns whether there's a permit or not. I'm no fan of having to register with the government. The reason for that is the government's going to decide this person or that person isn't entitled to have a gun, and this and that other person can have one. I don't think it's the government's business. There's nothing in the Constitution that makes it the government's business. If you want to carry a gun, then you have a right under the Second Amendment to the Constitution to do so. If the campus wants a voluntary program for people to voluntarily register that they're carrying a weapon on campus, I see nothing wrong with that. But I'm no fan of infringing on the Second Amendment. I think once you start going down that road, there's law after law, regulation after regulation. If you think someone is dangerous with a gun, maybe they ought to be in jail. But just the fact that you have a gun doesn't make you a criminal. It doesn't mean that you're going to use it. Registration doesn't unload a gun, and it doesn't take the capacity to pull the trigger away from you. All it does is gives the government more power. And I'm against anything that gives the government more power than they have. There's overreach not just in the federal government, but in the state government. And why our Attorney General is not addressing overreach in the state government, I don't know.
Ms. Rutledge, 2 minutes.
Thank you. It's important that we address gun safety at all levels, and we're seeing at our high schools, our college campuses, and it's gun safety, but also being prepared for when an individual comes onto a campus. And what this bill did and what this allows are for those students on those college campuses to defend themselves from someone who might show up with a gun with ill intentions and bad intentions. We want our Kansans, whether they're going on college campuses or otherwise, to be able to protect and defend themselves. That is our Second Amendment right. I stand here today as the only candidate in the Attorney General's race to be endorsed by the NRA. And that is an endorsement I am proud of, because we must defend our abilities to protect ourselves, while at the same time to make sure that individuals who have mental disease and illnesses are getting treatment, and that we have more opportunities for our Kansans, whether they're teachers, other school personnel, to note whether or not someone is receiving or should receive more mental health treatment to avoid these dangerous, deadly situations on our college campuses, or God forbid, on our high school and elementary campuses. As we saw in Jonesboro so many years ago, Arkansas was one of the first states to have a tragedy at a school. But however, we must not infringe upon law-abiding citizens' rights to carry firearms and to defend themselves.
Thank you, Ms. Rutledge. Mr. Lee, 1 minute.
Okay. Yes, gun safety is very important. The fact that we have campus problems like we've had in the past with shooters does not mean necessarily that this would be an answer to the question. I myself have fond memories of firearms when I was a child, and I actually have a couple of rifles right now that were handed down from my grandfather. So I really think there's a place for common sense protections for people on campus, but I'm not sure that the fact that we have guns on campus makes it any safer.
Next question from Ms. Lillian, and it goes first to Mr. Hicks.
Last year, Arkansas executed several death row inmates, but not before considerable resources were expended by the Attorney General's office to defend against legal challenges by the inmates themselves, outside groups like the Innocence Project, and the drug manufacturers. Other states like Oklahoma are now considering switching to nitrogen gas to avoid lawsuits by drug manufacturers and distributors and assure the availability of execution methods. Should Arkansas consider similar actions?
Arkansas needs to abolish the death penalty altogether. You look at the corruption going on in the legislature. Everybody knows that the corruption is still rampant. Everybody knows that we haven't reached the end of the investigations of all of this. Politicians are trading people's lives for votes. Now, many people who have been charged with murder have committed heinous crimes. They deserve to die. I'm not arguing that at all. They are people that the world may be better off without. But it's not fair to the loved ones of the people, of the victims of these people, to have to wait 15 or 20 years before it is pronounced that justice is served. They can raise their children with all this bitterness, waiting on an execution. It's a long and hurtful ordeal for people who need to get past it. Their loved one has been killed, and the person needs to be punished, and to say that the person has not gotten punished as if he's in some waiting room when he's on death row for 15 or 20 years, that's not the case. There are times with advances in DNA, we find that the wrong person has been convicted. But it's not so much for fairness for the people who have been charged with murder and other heinous crimes, although they should receive a fair trial. But politics and death don't go well together. The government shouldn't have the authority to kill someone. No matter how bad we think they need it, how bad we'd like to do it ourselves, we should not give our government the authority to kill someone.
Ms. Rutledge, 2 minutes.
Thank you. During the spring of 2017, when the governor set those 8 executions and we were able to carry out 4, that was a very challenging time for the Attorney General's office because of the enormous amount of filings from the federal public defenders. However, I felt it was important, and our attorneys worked day and night to ensure justice was carried out, that these families, those victims, deserve justice. And as I spoke to those family members, repeatedly I heard from them. They said, "Leslie, this is the first time we feel like someone's been fighting for us." Or, "Leslie, I'm finally going to see justice for my husband who lost his life at the hands of that evil person." And that's what's important, is that we carry out and see justice. As to the protocol, as we go into this 2019 legislative session, I think it is important that we look for other methods or drugs to use. Nebraska, for example, has recently used fentanyl in carrying out an execution. Look at what other states are doing and what could be upheld when challenged in the courts. It's not a matter of if it will be challenged, but when. And we stand ready at the Attorney General's office to ensure that justice is carried out, to defend Arkansans against violent crimes. As the Attorney General, I've personally argued a murder case, winning that case at the Arkansas Supreme Court. It's the first time many can remember the sitting Attorney General ever arguing a case before the Arkansas Supreme Court, because I feel like it's important that we carry out justice, that we uphold these convictions, and we give those families the closure that they need and deserve. I will always do that as your Attorney General to make sure that we have justice in Arkansas.
Mr. Lee, 2 minutes.
Paramount, what ought to be first and foremost, is the family of the victim and their well-being, of course, because they are reliving this tragedy that happened to them. The Attorney General is supposed to carry out the law, and the law of Arkansas is the death penalty right now, and I, as Attorney General, would carry that out. I would follow the law whether or not I like it or not. What I don't like is the fact of what happened last year. This was basically a rushed attempt to execute 8 people in a very short period of time using drugs that were about to expire, execution drugs that were about to expire. It was a media circus. These people that are victims, the families of the victims, deserved not to be thrust into the spotlight and not to, to be given some space, basically. Give them some space because they are reliving this tragedy that happened to them. You have to look at setting things like this with regard to human dignity. I would not set anything without, set a execution date without taking into account the victims, taking into account human dignity. And I would never ever do what was done last year in this rushed attempt in a hugely media saturated way caused by General Rutledge. And I agree that Oklahoma, places like that are looking at other ways to do it and avoid these. That's something that probably should be looked at, but Oklahoma is doing it because they had some obvious problems with drugs and the execution of an inmate back then. So yes, I would definitely not do it the way it was done last year.
Mr. Hicks, you have 1 minute, sir, for rebuttal.
I agree with Mr. Lee on that. Last year was pathetic. In my opinion, Governor Hutchinson has blood on his hands. It was a race to kill as many people as he could, and it doesn't matter if those people deserve to be killed or not. We're up here talking about what's the best poison to use, or maybe we should hang them or shoot them in the back of the head or something. It's time that we get past that. And if people want closure, then when a person gets life without, then the people get as much closure as they can get. Executing people doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't deter anything. It hurts the families of the victim. It hurts the families of the defendant. So I would strongly oppose the death penalty. I don't think we ought to have it at all.
Byron Tate, question first for Ms. Rutledge.
The right of citizens to hold state government accountable was muted by the state Supreme Court when it ruled that the state could not be sued. How far does the sovereign immunity of the state of Arkansas go, and what changes should be made?
Well, thank you, Byron, for that question. As the Attorney General, it is the job of the Attorney General, it's my job to defend the state when sued. When the Supreme Court ruled recently in the case that the state of Arkansas could not be sued and sovereign immunity, it has created, unfortunately, chaos with regard to what cases can be brought up, what issues can be brought up. And so I do believe that this is a prime example where we have to be reflective and to look at a decision by the Arkansas Supreme Court, how it's impacted Arkansans, how it's impacted our state agencies, to ensure that we address it in this coming 2019 legislative session. We have been working with the office as the Attorney General. We advise all state agencies, boards, and commissions on a daily basis. And in that role, we have had numerous conversations advising state agencies, boards, commissions about how to implement this, how to assure Arkansans that the state it's not going to take advantage of them, certainly, and to make, we must hold the state accountable also. But again, it's my job to represent the state of Arkansas. So as we have seen this come down over the last year and a half, we will be talking to legislators. I believe we have some measures in place to address the court's decision. Again, it has created chaos because of the ramifications of individuals, but in terms of representing the state of Arkansas, that's my job, and unfortunately, I'm very limited as to what I can say about any specific cases.
Mr. Lee, 2 minutes.
Yes. General Rutledge talked about the chaos. She didn't talk about the fact that the Attorney General's office contributed to that chaos. They're the ones that argued the sovereign immunity issue before the court. And it surprised a lot of people, including members of the legislature, who like to be able to cut out exceptions to the sovereign immunity in certain situations. The chaos, again, was participated in by the Attorney General's office. I agree that the solution needs to be one that we look at the legislature, and I would be the first one to get involved in that and make sure that we look at that fact, because if you can't sue the state in certain questions, and I think the case that this involved was just overtime for a worker at a community college, where he could not take his case to court with regard to whether or not overtime. This cuts across all types of issues where administrative law and other areas where we have to be able to have maintain some action, especially if the legislature agrees that it's necessary. So I agree about the chaos created over this issue of sovereign immunity, but I also think the Attorney General's office created that chaos by arguing points in several cases, including that community college case that led to the change.
Mr. Hicks, you have 2 minutes, sir.
I would like to see a citizen initiative that limits immunity. Basically, immunity is saying that, well, we did something to hurt you, but we're the government or it's a government employee, so it doesn't matter that we hurt you and you can't recover from that. Anybody who has filed a suit against any state official or state department, the first thing that's argued every time is immunity. Sovereign immunity, qualified immunity, whatever kind of immunity they can come up with. And very often, cases get dismissed on grounds of immunity on summary judgment. I think when the state wrongs a person or a company, for that matter, then it should have to pay for that. It's better if it just doesn't wrong anybody, but that happens sometime. And if it's accidental, then, you know, you still need to take responsibility for it. But very often it's not accidental. There are people that act however they want, and they'll create an enormous amount of liability, and people can't recover from that. So I'm in favor of limiting immunity substantially. It would be one of the last things that I would argue as Attorney General.
Ms. Rutledge, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. I think this is a prime example of my opponents, and Mr. Lee in particular, doesn't understand the role of the Attorney General. And perhaps it's all those years being a liberal trial lawyer that comes into his way of thinking. As the Attorney General, I defend the state of Arkansas when sued. And it's my job and the attorney's job at the office to always defend the state of Arkansas and to defend Arkansans. And that's what we have done for the last 3.5 years, defending Arkansans against those who seek to harm us, whether it's criminals, con artists, or an overreaching federal government. I don't want to be a liberal trial lawyer like Mike Lee. I am your Attorney General.
All right, next question comes from Mr. Bronner, and it's first to Mr. Lee.
Arkansas has been involved in numerous legal actions against the federal government in the past few years. It is currently a party to a lawsuit in Texas by 20 states seeking to have the Affordable Care Act overturned. 16 states and the District of Columbia are defending the law. How actively should the Attorney General be involved in these lawsuits by states that are intended to affect federal policy?
All right. Yeah, with regard, thank you for the question. With regard to the Texas lawsuit over the ACA and Medicaid expansion, if Attorney General Rutledge is successful in that and wins the case overturning Medicaid expansion, what that means is 250,000 Arkansans will lose health insurance. The people of Arkansas will be less secure and less healthy, and the budget will explode. Our state budget will explode without this. She needs to check first with Asa Hutchinson and the Republicans in the state legislature before she files this lawsuit, because neither one of them want that to happen for those reasons. Believe me, they don't want that to happen. The Attorney General is being an activist on some of this. I'm not saying there's not occasions where suits need to be brought, but a lot of what's happening right now is done for political purposes, done for ambitious purposes. It's done for other purposes, playing DC politics, whatever. It's been doing for that. And what happens when that happens is that resources in this state that could be used to fight internet scammers, internet predators and scammers and things like that are not there. So it's a distraction for the Attorney General to run around the country, get involved in these lawsuits that most of the time have nothing to do with Arkansas and strictly fit a pattern that this Attorney General follows in getting political and playing DC politics. In the case of the ACA, it is actually an Attorney General's action that could deprive people of health care, and that is so wrong. There's nothing good about a situation like that. I would, again, finish by saying these things are basically being done by someone who has other ambitions, other motives, and it's a distraction that's hurting the state, and I would not do that.
Mr. Hicks, you have 2 minutes, sir.
I don't think the Attorney General is being all that effective by suing the federal government. I believe if you think laws need to be changed, maybe you should run for president or Congress or whatever, but I'm not in favor of shaking down pharmaceutical companies, for example. It has gotten to a point that people who are in pain go to a doctor with genuine pain, and a doctor is afraid to prescribe them more than gabapentin or naproxen. I'm one of those people. I have back problems, and you can't get pain medicine hardly anymore because they're cracking down on it, because it helps build their case. I think the government ought to stay out of federal politics, and it ought to stay out of a person's medical decisions. I know that she's got several lawsuits federal lawsuits going in this country, but she hasn't done anything really to implement the Medical Marijuana Act. It's been 2 years. There are people who are going to die that could be treated with this. I have a brother, his name's Randy, I appreciate your prayers for him. He has pancreatic cancer, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There's not a pain medicine that stops the pain, but doctors are limited on what they can do because they might get sued or it might hurt their case against some pharmaceutical company. We don't need to be suing pharmaceutical companies. We need to be taking care of the business in Arkansas that's been neglected.
Ms. Rutledge, 2 minutes.
Thank you. It is important that Arkansans look to the history of the Affordable Care Act. Yes, I was against the Affordable Care Act, but when that law was challenged previously and the Supreme Court upheld that law in a very narrow 5-4 decision, Chief Justice Roberts decided to go with those justices upholding the Affordable Care Act, commonly called Obamacare, based on the tax penalty on the individual mandate. This past December, the U.S. Congress passed a law eliminating the tax penalty on the individual mandate, removing that crutch that Chief Justice Roberts had leaned on to uphold the entirety of Obamacare. I joined with 19 other states to challenge Obamacare because that clause is now removed. We no longer have the tax penalty on the individual mandate. What Chief Justice Roberts said was that the Commerce Clause can regulate commerce, but it cannot require commerce. It can't put commerce forward, and that's exactly what the Affordable Care Act does. That's why I challenged it. Arkansas did what we must and make a good out of a bad situation by Arkansas Works. I have spoken to the governor, matter of fact, about this lawsuit, and I have spoken to the governor about Arkansas Works and to ensure that Arkansans are taken care of. We must talk to Congress and to make sure that when the courts under this new Supreme Court with Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh, when Obamacare is overturned by the court because of this lawsuit that I am part of, that Congress is the one making laws and they are implementing laws that don't overreach.
Mr. Lee, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. With regard to Mr. Hicks talking about we shouldn't be shaking down drug companies, we have allowed these drug companies to mislead doctors and patients about the addictive power of these opioids. They have made millions of dollars, and they knew what they were doing because they were selling 8 million pills in a town of 350. Medical marijuana, there's been a delay on that. This is the will of the people. The delay bothers me. It should bother the Attorney General. It's the will of the people. It needs to be implemented quickly, and it needs to be done with the help of the Attorney General and not the hindrance of the Attorney General. She's talked about the details of the lawsuit in Texas. The bottom line is 250,000 people are going to lose health care. 21% uninsured rate in Arkansas. Before this, down to 11%. If she's successful, it'll shoot back up to 21%.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. We have reached the point in our broadcast and our debate tonight for closing statements. And again, as was determined by drawing prior to the debate, Ms. Rutledge, you have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you also to AETN, UCA again, as well as our journalists for today's questions. It's been an honor to be addressing Arkansans directly in your homes. Friends, I have a record of accomplishment as your Attorney General, going after criminals, con artists, and overreaching federal government. In the last 3.5 years alone, I have had more Medicaid fraud convictions than the prior 16 years combined. We've launched a Social Security disability fraud unit, saving taxpayers over $20 million from those individuals who have wanted to defraud the system by claiming benefits that they weren't owed. Likewise, I've done more with less. We have literally lowered the budget at the Attorney General's office while providing more resources to Arkansans. Not only do I travel to all 75 counties each and every year visiting with you, the office hosts hours in all 75 counties, making it more accessible to you so you don't have to drive to downtown Little Rock to have that face-to-face conversation. I will always defend our families' faith and freedom against those who look to harm us. And whether it's here in Arkansas or suing individuals across the country, whether it's a bad business or someone looking to infringe upon our religious rights and our personal freedoms, because if they infringe on those rights in another state, they're going to infringe on them right here in Arkansas, and I won't stand for it as your Attorney General. We must defend Arkansans. We must protect the Constitution. I will always defend you as a Christian, pro-life, gun-carrying, conservative mama. I ask for your vote, friends. I hope to keep working for you because no one will outwork me as your Attorney General. Thank you.
Ms. Rutledge, thank you. Mr. Hicks, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I'm not up here to be cute. I would lose if that were the case. But I don't carry a gun. Haven't had a gun since I was 19 years old. But I know what the Second Amendment says. And it is a right to not be infringed. I believe the Attorney General should follow the Constitution, yes, but the Attorney General should also be proactive. People, not just agencies, need defended. Our ethics bill that was passed a couple of years ago that stretched out the term limits for the legislature. Well, that wasn't in the ballot title. That should have been challenged, but it wasn't. I don't think it's the job of the Attorney General to promote their family values or religious beliefs as they're pro-life, they're gun-toting, whatever. There should be a separation between church and state. Yeah, I'm against abortions, but I'm not against it to the extent of passing an amendment that bans it. And the reason for that is you have to convince people to quit doing it rather than force them to. It's that way with a lot of laws. We have too many laws and too many lawsuits going on, and we need to worry about what's happening here in this state. If you elect me, I will serve not just the agencies of the state, I'll serve the people of the state. And if I see where a misleading law has been written by the state legislature, I'll let the people know about it.
Mr. Hicks, thank you. Mr. Lee, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, AETN, and thanks to everybody involved in this debate. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. I want to work hard to be the people's lawyer. When I was at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, I was aware of Chinese imported drop-side cribs coming into this country and being sold that were killing kids. They were killing kids. And I have never worked harder in my life than to get those things off the shelves of every single store in the country. And that's what I did. I helped do that. And I have never worked harder on anything, and I plan to do the same thing with regard to the Attorney General's office. I will work hard for you, and I will work hard on consumer protection. Make sure these scammers and payday lenders and whatnot do not get a free pass, and when I'm Attorney General, they'll know they'll not get a free ride. Corruption. I will work as hard as I can on this corruption issue. You've heard my pledge to root it out. You've heard my plan with a strengthened ethics law. In the last 4 years, nothing has been done by the Attorney General. Nothing at all. The last 4 months, integrity unit. Window dressing is what it is. Opioids. 75 counties wanted a united effort against the opioid industry for deception of all these traits of the drugs. And they wanted the Attorney General to join with them. What did she do? Stabbed them in the back, basically. Did not join them. They wanted her help. They did not get any help, and she tried to get their lawsuit dismissed. I will join their lawsuit on day one for these 75 counties and help them with that opioid crisis. And I offered a challenge to my opponent, Leslie Rutledge, about why she continues to take money from these opioid companies that are poisoning Arkansans. She did not respond. I will not let that happen. I will be the people's lawyer. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, thank you very much. And our special thanks tonight to our panel of journalists, Steve Bronner, Janelle Lilly, Byron Tate. Ladies and gentlemen, the nominees for Attorney General of Arkansas, Libertarian, Democratic, Republican. Our thanks to you. And our thanks to you for here in our studio and at home for joining us here on AETN for Debate Week 18.
Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.